Most people familiar with DMT have either taken oral doses with MAOIs or have smoked it as the freebase. I have done both and have had many awe-inspiring experiences. Experiences on DMT via other routes of administration are more rare. By other I mean injection. Intramuscular injection was, maybe is, popular for legitimate study. Personally I don't care for the hassle and muscle stiffness of this route of administration when the same effects and onset can be expected from smoking. Intravenous injection is another matter entirely. Most people would describe smoking DMT as like getting hit with a ton of bricks. IV DMT is like getting hit with a small planet. What follows is my last and most intense experience with DMT acetate IV. About 1 year ago I decided to clear out my closet and found something like 400 grams of Mimosa hostilis root bark left over from the previous year before I moved in with roommates who were somewhat anti-drug. Not wanting to have that sort of thing just lying around, I decided to dispose of it. Over the course of a few weeks I extracted over a gram of DMT. I don't remember the exact quantities but I do remember it was enough for me and my friends to trip for quite some time. Wanting to fully experience DMT in all of its forms, I had decided to experiment with 4 administration about a month earlier. Having had a bad experience the previous year trying with the hydrochloride salt, I decided to try with the acetate salt. I was successful and really impressed with the intensity of it. At around as low as 1/6 the active dose of the smoked form, I was thrust immediately, even more immediately than smoking, into the trip. It is like those roller coasters that suddenly launch you down the track like a rocket. Unfortunately, the initial euphoria I usually get with smoking it is replaced with a jolt, a holy shit feeling, but the other effects are usually the same, just amplified slightly. I say usually because at higher doses this is not true. This happens to be the case here. It was mid-afternoon, mid-autumn at the house that I lived in with 2 roommates. One was home. I really didn't like living there because the guy that was there was a real asshole. He had specifically asked me when I moved in not to extract DMT there, but I asked him years ago to not be such an asshole, so we ended up with a case of you get what you give. It was a beautiful day, and I was in a good mood, but bored and dreading a class I would be heading to in about 50 minutes. I don't remember what class, but I remember knowing I would be bored out of my skull. To spice things up, I decided to do a little experiment. I wanted to try an IV dose the same size as a small smoked dose. I can't recall the size, maybe 40 to 80 milligrams. This was prepared by filling a 1 cc syringe full of distilled water. 60 units are added to a bottle cap, 40 to a spoon. To the cap was added a few drops of lab-grade glacial acetic acid from an eyedropper. The DMT was added to the spoon and heated lightly until it softened. A couple drops of the dilute acid was added and the spoon was heated. This was repeated as many times as necessary to fully dissolve the DMT. I discovered the first time doing this that adding too much acid was very bad. It causes mild acute acidosis. I got a not an uncomfortable push. Breathing sped up dramatically and I could actually taste vinegar as I exhaled. It also caused pain at the injection site. Blood is slightly basic and is buffered, so this lasts only a few seconds, but after that first freaky time I was extremely careful with the neutralization. I have since read on some forum that, unlike the HCl salt, DMT acetate can be isolated in crystalline form, which would eliminate problems with over-acidification, but I have not tried so I can't confirm this. Once all DMT had dissolved, a small piece of a cigarette filter was placed in the spoon and a perfectly clear mixture was pulled into the syringe. Once I had used yellow-tinted DMT that had not been recrystallized and the solution came out slightly yellow, but if the DMT is good, it will come out clear. I was otherwise clean and sober. I don't remember eating anything yet that day. The sun was shining through the window as I had removed one of the decidedly southwestern colored Afghans I was using as a curtain. My room is decorated with Alex Gray prints, carpeted with material with similar color schemes as my curtains, and most of the furniture is wood. In a sentence, it is set up to be cool to trip in. I turned on a Tool song from the Lateralus CD, tied off, and pushed in the plunger. There was no burn. No hyperventilating vinegar breath, so there was no appreciable excess of acid. Though the dose was prepared perfectly, immediately, I knew was in for something I didn't expect. Sometimes I've experienced and have had others describe a subtle change in hearing when smoking DMT. It is like tinnitus, but not exactly audible, just a perceived change in frequencies. This was the first change in perception I experienced, only more pronounced. In maybe 1 second after injection, this very audible whining started, and quickly became louder. Soon after, the visuals started. These were unlike any DMT visuals I have had, in that there were no patterns. Becoming startled, that jolt I mentioned earlier, I bolted upright out of my seat and looked around. Instead of euphoria, I experienced apprehension and meth-like stimulation. Everything had the look of a water painting. Then I noticed that I no longer noticed that noise, but could not hear the music either. I could hear nothing. Now I was becoming concerned, and that manifested itself into the trip. Vision was extremely disorienting, as nothing really made sense. The colors and objects of my room were mostly meaningless. Everything seemed to be one fluid object that I couldn't focus on, but I was able to recognize the chair I was until moments ago sitting in calmly. It moved from the edge of my vision to try to wrap around me, but I quickly turned away to escape its ravenous grasp. I've had strange delusions like this on acid, but DMT has always been more a visual trip without too much insane thinking. Realizing this in a moment of clarity, I became less frightened of the gathering forces of furniture preparing for attack and more frightened of the possibility that I had done something incredibly stupid. Today I believe that injecting DMT is pretty stupid, but I'm glad I got to experience it. As the increasing visual chaos and apparent deafness became almost too much to bear, the strangest thing happened. Fade to white. My entire field of vision just faded to white. I was standing up in the middle of my room with music playing, blind and deaf. I know I moved my head around to see if that would help, but it didn't. I could feel the presences but could not see or hear any one thing. Pessimistic, I was sure my roommate had come in and saw me standing still in the middle of the room with music playing, staring blindly and unable to hear or respond. I thought the chair had consumed me. I thought I had caused myself permanent brain damage. I thought I had died. Time had no meaning, so I don't know how long this lasted, but it did finally fade back to reality. The trip took a more normal direction, but I was still rattled. The final effects faded 45 minutes after injection. Just in time to get to school. Having survived the ordeal, I was very excited. I called a friend and described the experience. He said in so many words that I had lost my fucking mind, doing something like that. Later I tried to find cases of acidosis that had similar symptoms but could find nothing. I have to conclude that these strange occurrences are from a massive dose of DMT. All in all, this was the most frightening experience I've ever had, including opiate overdose, a bad reaction mixing MAOIs with MDMA accidentally, being robbed at gunpoint, etc. I submit this experience not only to add to the available information on DMT preparations and trips, but so others might decide that 4 isn't really the route to take. Injecting a chemical of often questionable purity mixed with vinegar directly into the vein is reckless. I was careful. My DMT was the purest high or anyone I know has ever seen. My GAA is about as pure as it gets, pH was as close to 7 as possible, but looking back I realize how reckless that really was. A normal IV dose has effects almost indistinguishable from that of a normal smoke dose, so why bother?